Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for another webinar presented by Heritage Ohio. Also, our webinar is presented in part by the Ohio Arts Council and the Ohio Department of Development. Today we have Adam Eltrich from the State Preservation Office who will be sharing information about the Certified Local Government Grant Program. Adam has been with Ohio History Connection and SHPO for nearly 5 years. Prior to that, he worked for the City of Columbus, Department of Public Service, and the State of Ohio. Very happy to have Adam here today, and hopefully you'll gain some information that can help you fund projects in your municipalities. So, Adam, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Again, my name is Adam Eltrich, and work for the State Historic Preservation Office. A little bit more background on myself. I'm originally from Northeast Ohio, was born in Berea, consider myself a Cleveland West Sider, and grew up in Lorain County. I consider myself a government mule by heart. My first taste of government work was a summer help employee with the Lorain County Engineers, and kind of been working in government ever since. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the CLG grant program that the State Historic Preservation Office oversees, and after the overview, go over the 2022 grant applications that were awarded, and then from there give some bullet points on what I feel are good things to know about having a good grant application when submitting. So just an overview, the Certified Local Government Program is through the National Park Service, and where this funding comes from is the Historic Preservation Fund that's awarded annually from the federal budget. 10% of that money is allocated for certified local government grants. So we expect that to be approximately between 130 to 140,000 this year that we'll be able to award for federal fiscal year 2023. And we are, if you are not aware of it, we are right now in the middle of the application process for 2023. The applications opened up at the beginning of January, and they will be opened until March 31st of this year. So, so who's eligible for CLG applications for grants? So the basis is that your community has to be a certified local government in Ohio. And currently there's about 80 certified local governments in Ohio. I would love to see that number increase more. When I grew up, I don't know why I continue to know this, but there's 88 counties in Ohio because there's 88 keys on a piano. And so we roughly have 80. I would like to see have almost a CLG per county for the state of Ohio. I think that would be a great goal to have. But not just CLG communities can apply, also third-party applicants can apply that are nonprofit or considered community development corporations or group friends of a historic site. So you don't have to be a CLG to apply. You can be a third-party applicant. But however, if you are a third-party applicant, you still need to have the signature authority from the city or town to apply for the grant. So you have to communicate with your CLG contact to make sure you are in the clear to apply for the CLG grant. As I stated, the grant application this year is currently open. It will be open again until March 31st. Then it will be reviewed and scored by the State Historic Preservation Board, and we will announce awards at the June 2023 State Board meeting. And from there, we will most likely be in contract by hopefully July 1st of this year. And what's really great is that a couple years ago, we have now, the program used to be only be 2 federal fiscal years. So to make that clear is that even though right now we're in the grant application program, in the federal government's eyes, this program opened up on October 1st on the federal fiscal year. So before, it used to only be 2 years, and we would get in the contract halfway through that first year with entities, and you'd only really have a year and a half to get the project done, which kind of sometimes would be very difficult to achieve, and we're kind of up against the clock. But fortunately, they have extended it to be 3 fiscal years now. So we actually have a 3 fiscal year period for the projects to be completed, which is really good. And just to kind of return a little bit to CLGs, if you're not a CLG and you would like to be a CLG, I would email Nathan Bevel, who's our certified local government contact for entities to become CLGs or trainings for current CLGs. He is the guy to get a hold of. Also new this year, we have gone to an online application. So if you're familiar with the CLG grant program previously, it used to be a PDF application that had to be filled out and submitted through Dropbox. We've changed that now where the application is through Foundant, which is also what the Ohio History Fund grant program uses. So it's all online, and that is how the main application is to be submitted. If you follow the instructions in the application, there will be opportunities to use Dropbox for any additional attachments or documentation that's necessary for the application that would be used still for Dropbox, but the main application will be through the Foundant application. So eligible activities. CLG grants can be used for a wide variety of projects for communities and entities. You can use it to design and develop guidelines for historic districts or for citywide historic guidelines. There's also it can also be used for brick and mortar projects for buildings. It can be used for feasibility studies for buildings, for potential projects of what this historic building could be used for in the future, or if is it even feasible for the project for the building to be saved or maintained in a certain way. A good example of that was a couple years ago, we awarded a grant to the Cleveland Restoration Society for the Mount Zion East Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio. And the unique part of that building is that it is a serpentine stone building. And serpentine stone, while it looks great and it gives a green emerald look for a building, it does not hold up well in harsh weathers. And if anyone's familiar with Northeast Ohio, we typically get harsh weather up there, especially in the winter. So they actually did a feasibility study to replace all the stone with a stone that's more, they can hold up better and hold up longer in the weather. So we also do projects for conferences. For example, Cincinnati hosted a preservation conference this past late summer and received funding to help support the sessions that were taking place at that conference. So there is, like I said, there's a wide variety of projects that can be used for the CLG program. But what's really important to remember is that the tie to the CLG grants is that it has to involve either a building or a district that is either on the National Register or has the potential to be on the National Register. So the CLG grants can be used to help fund a National Register listing for a building or a district, or it can fund projects that are already on the National Register. So that is a big thing, is that it has to be a building or a district connected to the National Register. So I know I get a lot of questions too on this next portion are the funding priorities. And if you're, again, familiar with the CLG grant, the funding priorities typically don't change year to year, but what the funding priority is that it's a project that does not require a match for the grant. So typically any grant application has to have at least a 40% match of project cost. The CLG grant can contribute to up to 60% of a normal non-funding priority project. But if it's a funding priority, the grant can do 100%, can cover 100% of that project. So I will go over these really quick for the funding priorities for 2023. Projects to survey, nominate, or rehabilitate resources of the recent past. So this would be for mid-century buildings or districts in the state of Ohio. So if you look up Ohio Modern Preserving Our Recent Past, it does give a more detailed overview of what's considered mid-century. And so that's what the trick is, or what the emphasis is that the building or the district's time of its listing has to be in that period of mid-century. The second is projects that update the National Register, listed historic district nominations with expanded periods of significance or boundary amendments. So if you have a district already and you're looking to amend that district, then this would be considered a funding priority, which would not require match. In-state historic preservation related trainings for CLG commissions or related bodies, design guidelines or community-based preservation plan or plan components. Again, this is a big one that a lot of cities use for the design guidelines. So if you're a city that's in need of design guidelines, it does not require a match to for the project for this grant. And then finally, projects to survey, nominate, rehabilitate properties pertaining to heritage of underrepresented groups as defined by Finding Common Ground. So this is for underrepresented communities that a building or a historic district is affiliated with. I do want to emphasize, though, that if it's for a building or a National Register historic district, the National Register listing has to list the underrepresented community as part of that listing. It has to be, that community has to be part of the National Register listing for it to be considered part of this group and part of being a funding priority. If it's not, if the underrepresented community is not affiliated with the National Register listing, it will not qualify for the funding priority. That has been coming up more recently with questions I've had the last couple of years with grants. And so, for example, if there's a church in a historic district that is in the last 10 years has become like a Korean-based church, that's great, but unfortunately that would not qualify for the underrepresented community portion of the funding priority, because the listing is not, the Korean underrepresented group is not listed with the National Register listing. I hope that makes sense. Now, with funding priorities, yes, you do not have to match the grant. It's a zero match, which is I know that's really beneficial for communities. I know that historic preservation is not a point of emphasis for many cities. I understand that. However, it does not mean you don't have to put up a match. You know, I feel sometimes it looks good even with these with a funding priority project for the project to have some sort of match because it really shows the support and the importance of this project to be awarded. I think it just goes a little bit farther with showing the importance of it. So no one's saying you don't have to have match, but you're not required for it with a funding priority. And then so just some kind of basics with the financial requirements. As I said a little bit earlier, we expect anywhere between 130 to 140,000 to be awarded this year. There is a minimum amount, which is $5,000 is the minimum grant request. And we typically award grants between $10,000 to $25,000. We have awarded up to $30,000 and a little bit over that. There is no max request. You can request as much as you'd like. I just would not. I would not go over the $30,000 mark. We really try hard to spread the wealth of this project year to year in this grant program, and it would be very, I think it'd be very tough for us to fully award a grant over $30,000. Also, grants that go over $25,000 do require some additional reporting to the feds. But that's more on me, which would be on a case-by-case basis on award. Now, with some of the match requirements, one of the things I'd like to touch base on is especially for National Register listings, one of the great things we can do is we could pretty much tag up 2 grants for National Register listings for buildings and districts between the CLG grant and the pipeline grant. So I'm not going to get too much into the pipeline grant, but the pipeline grant is through the Department of Development, but is for getting buildings and the districts on the National Register, with the emphasis of that they will eventually become tax credit projects. But what's really great is that cities can use both the CLG grant and the pipeline grant to essentially get these projects fully funded without there being zero cost to the city. City of Cleveland did this a few years ago with their Midtown Historic District. City of Lorain did it a couple years ago with their Downtown Broadway Historic District, where they received a pipeline grant and then was able to get the difference funded through the CLG grant, and so it was zero cost to them. I know that a lot of cities, like I said before, don't have historic preservation budgets, so this is a great way to get a project done that's no cost to a city, especially for a district, and it really starts that wheel of getting tax credits and really getting buy-in to redevelop those areas. So I know it's a huge success, and it's a really good program because typically you cannot use other federal grants besides the Community Development Block Grant Fund to match the federal grant, but because the pipeline grant state funding, it can be considered match. And then another big thing I'd like to just point out is that the CLG grant is a reimbursement grant. So it is not funding that is given up front. It is you have to submit once the project's completed or a large portion of the project's completed, you have to submit a reporting and copies of receipts and payments to a contractor or a consultant for the for the work being done so that you can be reimbursed. So again, I just want to make that really clear that this is a reimbursement style grant program. Again, with going back with the grant requirements, there are standards that have to be met with the Department of the Interior, standards for archaeology and historic preservation. I don't want to get into too many details of that, but this is why the State Historic Preservation Office has a consultant list, so that those consultants are privy to these standards and guidelines, and we'll make sure that the project is done to those standards. And so, and then just really briefly on the selection process, that is through the Ohio Historic Site Preservation Advisory Board, which meets quarterly. A small group of them will actually go through and do this. There's a selection process, and we'll award the grants. On average, we probably see about 15 to 16 applications a year. We typically award anywhere from like 7 to 8, sometimes 10 grants per year, just depending on the amounts. But on average, we probably award about 50% of the applications that are received, which is really good. A lot of grant application programs don't have that high percentage of almost half of the grants received are awarded. So it's a really good opportunity for cities to utilize their CLG entity to get historic projects done. So now I'm just going to kind of go through some of the projects that were awarded in 2022's grant cycle, and just kind of briefly touch base on those, and just give there's just some examples of projects that have been awarded most recently. So the first project is called Invisible Ground with the City of Athens, and this is a really neat project where it's funding essentially markers throughout Athens for historic buildings and current historic buildings and buildings that have been torn down but are using a software to show what that building would have looked like when it's still stood through a phone application. So we're actually helping funding the markers for that project. So again, something new. This is really neat, where it's combining both historic and modern technology to educate people. City of Cincinnati, I said earlier, received funding for their conference that they held this past late summer. Cleveland, through the Cleveland Restoration Society, was awarded a grant for their feasibility study for the United Methodist Church in Cleveland to see the feasibility of replacing their historic wooden windows, or renovating their historic wooden windows at the church. In Columbus, the Greenlawn Abbey Preservation Association received funding to restore the glass windows, their stained glass windows at the Greenlawn Abbey. I know many people in Columbus are familiar with this location, but if you're not, this is one of my most interesting buildings, and one to talk about, this is truly a building that was a labor of love, where people got together and decided to start renovating this building, and I believe in the early 2000s. And I don't want to get too much into it, but what I really think is remarkable is that it's now it's a up and running mausoleum again, that is now selling plots within the mausoleum for use again, for burials. And it's really a really great story to talk about, of a building that was left to rot, that has come back and is now it's a commercial success story. So another grant The Lorain Historical Society received the grant for getting the National Register listing for the Lorain Carnegie Library. And again, this was another great example of utilizing both the CLG grant program and also the pipeline grant program, where they were able to get this listing done at the end of the day, no cost to them, because they were able to utilize both grant programs. And so, again, that was another, like I said, another great success story on utilizing 2 grants. And then finally, or not finally, but the another one in Lorain County, in Oberlin, the Oberlin Heritage Center received a grant for the Evans Bruce home to restore the front porch at that building. If you're not familiar with that home, that is actually a national landmark and is a home part of the Underground Railroad. And so that is again a project to restore the front porch to a porch that is more appropriate for its time of significance. And then finally, both the cities of Sandusky and Shelby received funding for design guidelines for their cities. And so that will be, those were the grants that were awarded in 2022. So I get a lot of questions about what is a great, or what makes a good application. And so I'm just going to give a couple, 5 bullet points I think that are important to remember when writing a grant application. First one might be obvious, but make sure it's complete. I do receive a few applications each year of incomplete applications or projects, and unfortunately, those are typically not seen through and are not graded to the point where they receive funding. And then that can mean everything from, making sure all the requirements of the application are met, but also, making sure that the project, whatever you believe is going to be the funding amount for the project, making sure that that amount of money is accounted for in the application. So if you're asking for $30,000 for a project that's going to cost $50,000, we need to know where that other $20,000 is coming from, whether it's a city match or private funding. That needs to be known so that we know that the project can be fully funded and be successful. When writing a grant, I always tell people to tell a story. Why is this project important? Not just to the city or the entity, but also the community. How its impact? What's the impact going to be? Why it's important for it to be funded? Why is it? What would happen if it wasn't funded? And don't just assume because it's a project or an application for historic preservation that everyone is going to know exactly what you're talking about in your application. I would always recommend writing it to somebody that doesn't know anything about historic preservation. I'm an outsider when it comes to historic preservation. My background, I do have a history degree in undergrad. I was going to be a history teacher in a previous life or in an alternate life, but that didn't work out. However, I don't have a historic preservation background, so I really am able to see these applications through, when I read them, is like I'm learning, and you'll tell a story, but teach us something in the application. I also think, support for these applications are very important. Not just financial support. Like I'm not going to get into the, having match when you're not required to, but like having an emphasis of like showing support, whether through like letters from council people or letters from business owners that there is community support for the project. I cannot tell you, there's been a handful of projects where grants were awarded and then suddenly there's not local support, and it becomes difficult to get the project completed. And so if you can show that there's support in the application, that it really goes a long way. Also having a plan or vision with the project is really important. You know, every historic building is important, but having, you know, like I said, a plan or a vision of where you want where the building is going to go, or why it's so important, again, is making sure, like, we don't want the funding just to go to a project it just dies on the vine, you know, after the project. We want to see, you know, how this is going to be impactful, and then where the project is going to go down the road. And then also, I also always recommend making sure that you're focused in on what the application is for on a project base. You know, is it, and I'll bring this up, is that anybody that's listening from Shaker Heights, a few years ago, they submitted an application that was for their historic wooden windows to be restored in the fire wing, the fire department wing of their city hall. And their first application was not scored very high. And one of the reasons why was that this wooden restoration project was just seen as like a blurb in the overall city hall restoration project. So it was like, this was like a $30,000 project that was part of like a $3 million project. And it unfortunately didn't score that well. And my recommendation was that they should reapply, but just focus in on the window restoration project and do not get into the details of the overall project. And so that's what, and then the next year they reapplied, and it was one of the higher scoring projects, and they were awarded the grant to restore those windows. So having an emphasis on the project and, you know, the details of that, specifically of that project, really goes into having a good application, I feel. So that is about everything I have that I wanted to talk about. So if there's any questions about the CLG grants or grants in general, I can answer those. I can also answer questions about proper shot put hammer technique in track and field throwing. And I can also help with best practices with garbage collection. When I was with the city of Columbus, I helped purchase all of their refuse collection equipment and garbage containers. So I have this wealth of knowledge in those areas that I don't get used to often anymore. But thank you again for listening.
Thanks, Adam. And if you have any questions, type them into the chat box now. We already have a few, so I'll get started. First question, is there funding still available for the pipeline grants? Do you know, Adam?
Yeah, so, and I apologize for not touching base on this. Right now, at this moment, there is no funding for the pipeline program. The pipeline money will restart July 1. So the pipeline funding is state calendar year. For those, I will just run through this very quickly. Federal fiscal year is October 1 till September 29th. State fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th. So pipeline is a state funded program, and so the money will get reset and refunded on July 1. So now to kind of backtrack a little bit, because we have this, there's a 3-year window now with the CLG grant program, and you could apply for a CLG grant this year, and if there's no rush to get it done, you could sit on it for a year and if you can't get the funding this year for the state, you could go after it next year so that you can get that match. I know that's not ideal, but because there is this 3-year window now with the CLG grant, you could wait, you could look at 2 pipeline grant cycles to get that matching. Before, it used to have to be it had to be the same year, but now because there's this 3-year cycle, you could potentially go after it for 2 years.
Thanks, Adam. Ellen has a question. Are buildings and historic districts the only types of properties eligible for CLG money? What about cemeteries, structures, archaeological resources, traditional cultural properties, etc.?
Yeah, so other portions that are not buildings or districts can qualify, but they have to be contributing to a historic district. So a great example is Shaker Heights a couple years ago got funding for a cemetery preservation plan. The cemeteries in Shaker Heights are part of historic districts. They are contributing to the districts, so they would qualify for the funding. So if these sites are considered part of a district, then yes, they could qualify. But they have to be contributing. That's the other big thing, is that if you have we had an application last year where the city wanted funding to help restore a gazebo in their main downtown area, but unfortunately the gazebo was a non-contributing piece of a building or a piece to the historic district, and it cannot qualify. So it's got to be contributing.
Thanks, Adam. Barbara is asking, if your building is on the National Register, but the district it is located in is not, are you still eligible for funding? They are in a CLG community.
Yeah, if the building is on the National Register, it would qualify. I'm assuming that building would be listed separately then, and not part of the district. I'm not heard. I guess I haven't heard of that situation yet.
Carolyn is asking, we are renovating a 1979 movie theater in a designated historic downtown district. Are we eligible for any funding?
Yes, I would. Is the theater is contributing to the downtown historic district? Yes, it would be eligible for a grant application.
All righty. Final chance to type in any more of your questions for Adam. I know many of you have simmering questions. You can always contact Adam directly. His email address is right there on your screen. But if you have some burning questions now is the time to ask. Matt, do you have any comments while we wait to see if there's any final questions?
Anyone that's on the webinar today, we hope that you will join us in Marietta on February 15th for our design training, part of our revitalization series. You may find information and registration for that event on our website, heritageohio.org. We're also having an historic tax credit workshop in Athens on February 23rd, and you can also find information on that on our website.
Alrighty, Carl's asking, will we get the slides for the presentation? They are available to you now on your control panel. It says handouts, and the CLG grant program overview PDF is right there. Alrighty, let's see. Zach has a question here. We have an AME church in Marysville just outside a registered district. Could this grant be used to recognize that structure to the registry?
Yes. Yeah, the grants can be used for getting buildings or districts on the National Register. Now, I probably should have mentioned this a little bit earlier, though, is that if you're familiar with that process, there is a questionnaire for the National Register that has to go through our office with our National Register group, which will then, you answer the questionnaire, they'll review it, and then they will send a letter either stating that they feel that it's a candidate to be listed. That recommendation needs to be part of the application. And I believe The deadline for that is like, I want to say is mid-March for the CLG grant, is that you have to have a letter from our office either recommending that the building or district can be listed to be part of that application. But yes, in that situation, if it's outside the district, I think there's one or two things you could do. You could either get it listed separately, or if it's close enough to the district, you could propose redoing district lines to have the building added. And if that's the case, then that falls under a funding priority, and that's a zero match. Typically, National Register listings do require that match of 40%. Also, just so everyone knows, is brick and mortars for the most part is a match required project. It's unless it's falling under one of those priorities, typically our brick and mortar projects do require that 40% match. And
Thanks,
just so
Adam.
sorry, Devin, real quick, our monies this year that we'll have for the 2023 grants to be awarded will be just under 145,000. So that will be the amount of money we will have for applications this year.
Andy has a question for you. Remind me again, how many CLG grant applications do you receive annually on average, and what number of those are funded?
Again, we receive anywhere between I'd say 15 to 16 applications a year, and on average, we roughly fund half of those. So again, but that also can factor in what the grant application requests are for. 1 year we did have, I think we had close to like 17, 18 applications, but we only funded 5 because the top 5 scoring applications were all over, we're at 20,000 or above in request. So, it kind of depends on what the requests are too, of how many we will fund. So I think on average, like just to real quickly for 2022, we received, I believe, roughly like $300,000 in requests, and then we ended up funding a little over 139,000, so roughly half. So that's what we usually fund year to year.
And Dan has kind of a sort of a similar question. Is there any way to view the applications that have been successful on the website?
Right now, no, not the applications itself, but if Dan wants
to email even like me, photos, examples.
Yeah, I can email out examples of some of the projects that have like completed projects in the past, of like what a completed project looks like with photos, or like I said, if there's any city out there that would like to see design guidelines, I can send you copies of those, or Dropbox them to you, because they can get pretty large in file size, just to show you can see what these look like completed. I can do that.
Thanks, Adam. This question was asked, and I'm more just giving some information. Betsy asked about some more information about the pipeline grant funding. If you have any questions about the pipeline grant funding, you can always contact the Ohio Department of Development. Lisa Brownell is the contact for that grant. She can give you all the information you need. And as Adam had mentioned earlier, the new funding cycle opens up on July 1st. So I would suggest contacting her sooner than July 1st, just so if you're interested in getting that funding, possibly you have all your ducks in a row, just so you can get the funding quickly, because it does move very quickly. And I believe they even tripled the funding available this year, and it still disappeared very quickly. So if you're interested in that, once again, Lisa Brownell at the Ohio Department of Development is the contact for the pipeline grants. Let's see.
Thanks, Devin. Just real quick with the pipeline, just so people know how that works, is Devin's absolutely right. Lisa Brownell is that contact for that. So how that process works is, again, starts with a CLG questionnaire from a National Register group. If they recommend that it can be listed, whether a building or district, you then submit that with the development's application to the Department of Development. They approve it. It is sent to me, and then I handle overseeing the project to make sure it's completed and paid out. So it's a development project, but very heavily involves the SHPO office. So again, it's for commercial buildings that can receive tax credits in the future. Thanks, Devin.
Yep. To Laura's question, yes, this will be recorded. Typically, you'll receive an email. Usually it's a day later, so 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. You'll receive an email with the recording. We also post it on our YouTube channel. So you just need to go to YouTube, search Heritage Ohio. Typically that's up usually 1 day or so later. So both of those options are available for reviewing this recording. Let's see. Next question is from Carolyn. Carolyn just asked about the 1979 movie theater. She's saying, to clarify, you said earlier, did you say that it is advisable to keep our grant requests under $30,000?
Yes, I would say that keeping requests under $30,000 is a good practice. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to say what you should apply for, but I think, keeping it under 30,000 is an advisable, is a good idea. And then, I know with like restoration projects for brick and mortars can be very expensive and very daunting. But I said, like I touched a little bit before, is that if you could pick a certain project out of that restoration that can be focused in for that money, that really helps with the applications. So like, for example, First Church in Oberlin was a great utilizer of the CLG grants for a number of years. Is that they actually had a preservation plan, and they had this list of all the projects that needed to be done throughout the church, and then they were able to determine which of the smaller projects they could go after CLG funding for. And almost every year would go after funding for specific projects for their restoration. So one year it was restoring the cement steps at the front of the church. Next year was windows. The year after that was brick and mortar with like actual brick and mortar restoration. So I know like people want to give us usually in their application give the overall number, but if you can just pick something specific out of that project, I think that really helps to keep it on the smaller side for the request.
Thanks, Adam. This might be more of a Nathan question, but there's a question about, do you know when the design trainings are this year?
I do not know when the design trainings are for I don't know if Nathan has like a set schedule for doing trainings. I know if you want to do trainings for the CLG, I would just reach out to him, and I think he does it more on a case-by-case situation where if it's requested, he'll go and meet with the entity to do that training.
Nathan Bevel is the name of the person, Robert.
Yep.
And his email address is nbevel, and I will type that in to you right now in the chat box. So that email address for Nathan is in the chat box now. You should all be able to see that. Any final questions for Adam? This has been a really productive set of questions so far. I think everyone's getting a lot out of it. But thanks again, Adam, for doing this webinar with us today. Everyone always has lots of CLG questions, and we're always glad to get this sooner rather than later as the deadline approaches for applications.
Yes.
And just to thank everyone for attending today. Matt, do you have any final comments before we sign off?
I do. We hope you'll join us on March 8th for Women's History Month. Our next webinar will focus on the First Lady's National Historic Site in Canton, Ohio. It's a really wonderful museum and a space. We look forward to learning more about that. Adam, thank you again for being our presenter today. We always appreciate the partnership, and we look forward to working with you and seeing some great projects.
Yeah, thank you both, Matthew and Devin, and everyone out there. If you do submit an application early, I will review those and I will review draft applications and give you any input that I can to improve that application. So do not wait to the last minute to submit your applications. So.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Adam, and we'll have a good day. We'll see you at our next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you.